Well, we're here today to talk a little bit more about site-based expenditure reporting. Now, many of you probably viewed a previous video where we reviewed some of the process to date. And today we're going to go a little further into some of the guidance that's been released by the State Board of Education. With me today to help us do that is Susan Harkin. Susan is the Chief Financial Officer of District 300, as well as Dean Romano, Dr. Dean Romano, I should say, Chief Operating Officer from Yorkville Community Unit School District 115. In addition, Sarah Shaw is with us, and Sarah is the Senior Manager for Fiscal and Academic Solvency at ISBE. And then Carrie Stewart, who is the Managing Director of the Afton Partners. And Carrie's role has been to help develop the guidance and take us to where we are today and even beyond as she's been related to the advisory work of this committee. So the question really before us is, what is site-based expenditure reporting and why are we doing this? Before we dive into the details on the guidance, I think it's important for us to do a little refresher. We did a previous video, but let's take one step back and talk a little bit about the process of getting to this particular point today. And Sarah, since your role with ISBE has been to sort of guide this, can you tell us a little bit more about what is meant by site-based expenditure reporting and why we're doing this here in Illinois?
Absolutely. And I think it is useful to keep ourselves grounded in what is the actual law and then where have we gone from there. So ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, was enacted at the end of 2015, and in it included a one-sentence provision of a new data point that states need to report on their report card. And I'm actually going to read through that sentence because it is only one sentence long, but it packs in a lot. So, the per pupil expenditures of federal, state, and local funds, including actual personnel expenditures and actual non-personnel expenditures of federal, state, and local funds, disaggregated by source of funds, for every LEA and each school in the state for the preceding fiscal year. So if we translate that into plain English, it means that while our districts have reported their district level finances on the state report card for many years, this is the first year that they will also be reporting school level information, or what we're calling site-based expenditure reporting. And it's also tied to the source of funds for those expenditures. Were they coming from federal sources or were they coming from state or local sources? After ESSA was passed, the Department of Education did issue a Dear Colleagues letter that gave states an additional year to do this reporting. So we're going to start reporting for the next school year, meaning that it'll be FY19 data. That is the first site-based expenditure level data that goes up on the report card. We felt lucky that in Illinois, these new data requirements came within a context where we were already thinking in similar directions, specifically around how can we be thinking about resource allocation in new and strategic ways. We can think about it in terms of how we match our students' needs with resources. We can think about it in terms of the relationship between investments and outcomes. And those threads have been coming through in things like evidence-based funding, which we'll talk about a little bit more. They come through in the ESSA state plan of being able to think about whole child, whole school, whole community. The financial picture is a real part of that. They come through in another external grant we had through the federal government, the Illinois Data First grant, also known as a state longitudinal data system grant. And they come through in the concept of fiscal and academic solvency, which is a fancy way of talking about how can we look at finance and academics as really two levers that we're pulling as part of raising student achievement and outcomes. So this didn't come into a vacuum. Site-based expenditure reporting is part of a broader thrust within the state to be really thinking far more holistically and mirroring the kind of work that our school business officials and superintendents have had to think about for years of how are we thinking about the district system more holistically.
So let's go to that evidence-based funding connection, because you were part of that in the initial work that you were doing through the governor's office and the governor's commission. And here we have that now enacted into law, and we're in the process of implementation of the EBF, or the evidence-based funding formula. So how does this tie in with that?
We get that question a lot. because most of ESSA is not tied to finance, and evidence-based funding is very closely tied to finance. In fact, that is the majority of the law. So I think it's important to start by saying that this provision is not a requirement under the evidence-based funding law. It is a requirement under ESSA, which is a federal law, rather than evidence-based funding, which is the state law. It also is not a requirement about how you spend your evidence-based funding funds, whether through your hold harmless or through any new tier funding that would come through. This is simply a way of showing how you have spent your funds once they went through. No prescriptions on the front end. It's also not a requirement to use school-based accounting as you're putting together budgets or systems. This is on the back end, where did money actually go? We certainly have districts that they're thinking about, okay, if I'm going to be able to show where I've spent my data, maybe I do want to change some of my systems on the front end to make that easier for me when it comes to reporting time. But that is local district choice based on what they think is going to be most useful for the district. And finally, it is not a requirement that leads to, I have to quote this because it's one of my favorite, it does not lead to function object codes by location on steroids. This was a fear that came out when we started talking about site-based expenditure reporting statewide, and as our recently issued guidance makes clear, while most costs will have to be accounted for in the reporting, districts have significant flexibility in how to be reporting those costs. And I really encourage everyone watching this webinar, if they have not done so already, they might want to hit pause and go pull up www.isbe.net/ESSA, find the site-based expenditure reporting header, and look at the materials we have there, including our guidance, which goes through exactly what we'll be asking of districts, and that we'll also be using some of our time here to talk through the key points of.
So let's shift a little bit then from the what is it and why are we doing it to the process that's been in place to try to get us to where we are today. And Susan, you are one of the business officials that served on the advisory group, along with Dean. I had a chance to sit on that as well. And we had some really good meetings talking about, what this is and why we're doing it, but also then giving guidance to ISBE on how to actually implement. So tell us a little bit more about the planning process, how this has been unfolding over the last couple of months, and especially as it relates to the final guidance that's actually hit the table.
Sure. So knowing that these reporting requirements and the timeline for implementation were in 2018 and 19, we knew there were going to be challenges and opportunities. So ISBE, along with the public education financial facilitators at Afton Partners, have convened an advisory group. And so that's what you were referring to. This advisory group is ensuring that the challenges are appropriately considered in this reporting change. The advisory group is building a multi-year implementation plan with ISBE. They're providing guidance and training and support to LEAs and our other reporting entities in the transition to the site-based expenditure reporting.
So it sounds like this advisory group is really key. I mean, they've held an important role in trying to bring this to fruition. But people might want to know, again, who was on that group? Who are the other people besides the three of us and Carrie and Sarah that were part of that advisory group?
So the advisory group was comprised of 25 superintendents, school business officials, and association leaders throughout the state. We had representatives from small, medium, and large-sized school districts. We also represented rural, urban, and suburban school districts from various parts all throughout the state. And the purpose behind having a diverse group was to make sure that we had diversity and understood the needs of the various school districts that would be having to comply with this new site-based reporting. And certainly we wanted to make sure that we understood the value and the impact of the work and considered those things as we began planning for the implementation to site-based reporting.
It's interesting you use the term value, because that had been a term that continued to come up over and over again. What is the value of this? What's the value proposition related to site-based expenditure reporting? So, Dean, give a little bit of background on that. Beyond the compliance issues that Sarah laid out, what we have to do under ESSA, can you talk a little bit more about what the advisory group has been thinking related to the value of site-based expenditure reporting?
Sure. Well, when we first started as an advisory group, we spent a lot of time putting together a recognition that the opportunity associated with site-based reporting was really going to provide us this new way of merging data. But before we could even get into that conversation, we really wanted to talk and focus on some value statements that would drive the work. With that being in mind, we recognize that beyond compliance, the reporting that we would be able to actually generate as this process moves forward would really be able, when used effectively, to drive local conversation and inquiry that not only was meeting the requirements of ESSA, but more importantly, would be in the best interest of students. And so a couple of the things that we wanted to kind of make sure we walk through, I'm going to read through these because these were some of the value components. We want to make resource allocation more readily accessible to schools and stakeholders. We want to empower LEAs and communities to assess and improve equity. We want to enable LEAs and communities to gain a better understanding of the relationship between student outcomes and financial resources. And we want to enable LEAs, schools, and the state to identify evidence-based best practices and opportunities to foster innovation between peers.
So given that backdrop then, what's the outcome then of the advisory group's work to date?
The advisory group put together guiding principles under which ISBE wrote the guidance for site-based expenditure reporting, consistent with the value proposition our group agreed upon and consistent with ESSA. Namely, guidance rather than formal changes to accounting rules. We wanted to stay close to the minimum ESSA compliance. Leverage existing reporting wherever possible. Couple the financial reporting with the state report card. Districts know their data best and can tell their own story. This initiative should and will evolve over years.
While each of these guiding principles played an important role in the guidance document that was developed, perhaps one of the most influential guiding principles for this reporting is that this is the district's data, and this is their opportunity to tell their district story. As we go through the guidance details later on, you'll see that much of the reporting is left up to the district's discretion. For example, how you allocate your centralized costs really is your ability to say, how do those costs associate to your schools and your sites? The data tables that are collected are in a summary format. They're not in a detail format, so certainly that gives you some ability, again, to really help you shape and form your school information, but the detail and the story that sits behind that is yours to tell.
So I agree with Susan's point, and what I'd like to add to that is a special note around the guiding principle of coupling the financial data with the information found on the student report card. The advisory group did determine there's a lot of opportunity for value to be found within this reporting component. However, it needs to be married with the contextual information such as student demographics, as well as academic results and school-specific information that is already found within the student report card. The expenditure data can tell a story, but only part. And so when you put those two things together, you're really going to have something that you can communicate out to your constituents within your community.
We're going to shift now from the how we got here discussion to what the guidance really is. And as a reminder to folks, ISBE released the guidance and it's on their website at www.isbe.net/ESSA. And there's a site-based expenditure reporting tab, as Sarah had mentioned previously. And Carrie, we're going to turn to you, as you and your team at Afton are facilitating this work with the advisory committee in conjunction with ISBE. And you played a large part in writing this guidance, using the principles that we've already discussed that have come forward from the advisory group. So tell us a little bit about the guidance document, and we'll dig deep into this now for a few minutes.
Sure. So first, what entities must report and for which students? So first, all local education agencies that serve or place at least one student in the 18-19 school year. Other institutions that are considered reporting entities include charter schools that are authorized by the State Commission. It should be noted that all charter schools authorized under a district LEA should be reported as an individual school site under the district LEA. For year one, there are some entities who will be exempt from this reporting. The ones that we're getting the most questions about are cooperatives, and cooperatives are being excluded from this reporting. Also, regional safe schools as well, those are excluded from this reporting, and you can see on this chart a number of other entities who are also exempt from the reporting. We have defined student and site for the purpose of this reporting. Namely, a student is any child aged 3 through 21 in grades pre-K through 12 who are served by an Illinois public education institution or placed to a private facility by a public education institution. A school or site is any public education institution within an Illinois LEA that serves students in grades pre-K through 12. This includes different kinds of schools within an LEA, such as charter schools and alternative schools. Next question is, what does this reporting look like? You see a graphic here that shows what is comprised in the numerator and the denominator of the per pupil expenditure calculation for a given school. The numerator includes box A, which is the site-specific expenditures, and box B, which is an allocation to the school of the district's centralized expenditures. The denominator box C is the number of school site students as previously defined. This next chart shows the data table that ISBE will seek to collect from each LEA for each school and the LEA in total. You can see rows going across for each school within the LEA. The columns going across include enrollment, site level per pupil expenditures, district centralized per pupil expenditures, and total school per pupil expenditures. You see that per pupil expenditures must be disaggregated between federal and state and local funds. You also see that we ask for total dollars of excluded expenditures from the LEA that must be reported alongside total expenditures for the LEA for the year. Some clarifications on this table. First, site-level expenditures must include any personnel assigned exclusively to a school and any non-personnel costs specifically attributable to the school. That's per the federal law that Sarah previously discussed. Also, the site's proportional share of the district's centralized expenditures should represent an allocation of centralized expenditures as a proxy for dollars spent serving each school. For reporting year 18-19, the allocation method utilized by LEAs to assign centralized expenditures to its school shall be determined by the LEAs themselves. That's what Susan referenced earlier with regards to leaving some discretion to districts in how to allocate expenditures. Some suggestions on allocation methodologies are provided in the 10-page appendix to the guidance document. So for those LEAs who are seeking assistance, we provided that. We provided those ideas. Again, it's to the district's discretion as to how they want to allocate those expenditures. Many districts have been looking at this data table as something that they want to work backwards from, and we encourage that. We are working on a collection mechanism through IWAs that's under development right now, but we do think it's a really good idea for folks to look at this table and assume that this is what's going to be reported, this is what's going to be collected, and definitely seek to work backwards from this. Moving along, you saw that we are asking some LEA expenditures to be excluded from the per pupil expenditure reporting for each school. The intent behind these exclusions is to reflect only expenditures for pre-K through 12 students being served or placed by the LEA, and also to reflect expenditures that are largely ongoing, normal course resource allocations. So all district expenditures should be included in site-based expenditure reporting, either among the site-specific expenditure reporting or the allocation of centralized costs, except that we have identified some exclusions from this reporting. You can see the list here of the funds and functions and object codes associated with the exclusions from this reporting. So you look at the list there, and I'll just clarify number 10 on this list. Object 500 is listed as an exclusion, which is capital outlay. It should be noted that capital in the education fund actually should be included. But everything else listed on here is an exclusion from expenditure reporting. And I just just would note too that we understand that districts use the chart of accounts in various types of ways. And so to the extent that districts might exclude some of these items, but aren't coding them to these funds or functions, we would just ask districts to exclude them whether they're coded to these specific funds and functions or not. Okay, so now that we have covered the numerator, let's move to the denominator. LEAs must include every student served by the school in the denominator with the following exceptions and notes. If a student is educated outside the district, whether placed at a private institution, another LEA, or any other entity, that student shall be included in the count of the home LEA per the guidance. Also, part-time students, such as half-day pre-K and half-day kindergarten students, shall be counted as 0.5 in the denominator. All other students shall be counted as 1.0. And for the 18-19 reporting year, the average of the student count on October 1 and March 1 of the reporting year shall be used. So while we've sought to keep the guidance as simple and as explicit as possible, we understand that every district has special circumstances and there are a lot of exceptions. We've tried to address some of those special circumstances in the guidance document. I'll go through some of that now, but we also know that we're available to address other special circumstances through training and other ways of communicating in the year and a half ahead. So first, let's talk about charter schools. There are two types of authorized charter schools. One are the state commission authorized charter schools. Those are actually local education agencies in of themselves and are considered separate reporting entities for the purpose of this reporting. Then we have charter schools who are authorized by local education agencies, by districts. So these charter schools should be reported by districts as a separate site, just like any other school within the LEA. LEAs will need to collect expenditure reporting from those charter schools in a manner that allows the LEA to report for those schools, and also the school district should exclude the school district's costs related to charters from the district level expenses that are allocated to district-run schools. Second is outplacements. Students placed and or served outside of the home LEA, regardless of reason, shall be included in the home LEA student count along with the associated expenses. We've given LEAs two options for reporting outplacement costs. Either one, creating a separate reporting site that captures all outplacement costs and students, or two, treating these costs as centralized expenditures and allocating the costs according to the district's discretion. LEAs should choose either of these two methodologies that best suits their district, with the exception that if an LEA has 10 or less students placed outside the district, the LEA should utilize the second option, which is treating them as central costs that should be allocated across sites. And of course, that's to make sure that we are not accidentally and overtly identifying costs associated with specific students. The third special circumstance relates to pre-kindergarten. So for the first reporting year, pre-K is included in site-based expenditure reporting. And just to clarify, these costs for pre-K should be reported only for students for which the district is incurring costs. So for example, there are a lot of districts that have programs such as Head Start that are funded outside of the district. And in those cases, those costs and those students would be excluded from this reporting. As far as what's included for pre-K, we anticipate two primary forms. There are pre-K centers, and there are pre-K classrooms within elementary or other grade level school sites. Pre-K centers are considered sites in of themselves within this reporting, and therefore must be included in site-based expenditure reporting, again, as their own entities. Pre-K classroom expenses within specific schools that have other grades have no special treatment, and so those pre-K expenses should be treated in those schools like any other grade. Also not noted on this slide, but we've gotten a lot of questions with regards to summer school and how that should be treated. We're also leaving that to districts' discretion. We can see how some districts might consider summer school as a centralized cost, and therefore they can allocate those costs across schools as they see fit. Or some districts might think that that is a site-specific cost and report the summer school cost to the sites where those students are being served for summer school.
Well, that was a lot of detail, which is pretty important for all of our members and viewers to know. But I would also encourage people to just rewind that, walk through that a couple times, see those slides, kind of understand exactly how to put together that reporting. Obviously, the guidance document itself has even more deeper detail written into that, as well as additional suggestions if people have needs to get clarification. And check that website as well, because there'll be more and more answers there, I think, as time goes on. But Sarah, I want to turn to you because we need to know then what districts should expect next. Like, let's talk timeline and let's talk support. What are those two categories, and what can districts expect from ISBE going forward?
So because we are in education, we like to backwards map. We are backwards mapping from when do districts need to do this reporting. And as soon as books close at the end of FY19, data collection window will be open, with the end result of that data going up on the report card that's reported for FY19. Now, the exact timing of that reporting is going to be dependent upon whether we do it on the report card itself in its immediate release, or if we do an update to the report card afterwards. But for a district thinking about when can I start reporting, it's right when those books close. So we're thinking about, okay, between now and then, we have a year and a half. How can we be setting up our districts for success? How can we be supporting? And we've got 3 major work streams that we're looking at. The first is training. That's probably the one that's at the front of people's minds, and we'll talk more about what that can look like, but it divides up into 2 major strands. First, the actual data collection and report development, but then also how to meaningfully use and communicate those data points. Secondly, data collection. How do we have a tool that can best extract data from districts so that it is as light a lift as possible, recognizing that a tool that's easy for small districts might be different from a tool that's easy for large districts just because of how data systems operate. And the third piece is data visualization. Dean had talked compellingly about how these data points, when coupled with other data points and able to look at them side by side, can be very powerful. But there's a fine line there of who's doing the storytelling when we put those data points side by side. So as part of this group's work moving forward, we'll be engaging with not only the advisory group and AFTN, but also with more external stakeholders to be thinking about how can we best promote data visualization that will uphold the value proposition that this advisory group put forward in the first place. To talk a little bit more about the training coming forward, because that's probably at the forefront of people's minds right now, some examples of what we will be offering will be things like beginning to prepare. At this moment in time, what can districts be thinking about even before we hit the next fiscal year? Budgets are getting put together. School districts are just thinking about where to put their resources, but also how to communicate where they're putting their resources. And so there's an opportunity right now to be doing some work. Secondly, things like the actual calculation. When you're putting together your per pupil expenditures, what are you drawing from? How are you choosing to do your allocation methodologies, especially for those centralized expenditures where districts have a lot of freedom, but that's also a lot of choices. And being able to guide through that choice process is something that we at the state would like to support. And Carrie pointed to some of the ways in which we're thinking individualized webinars may be able to help capture various audiences concerned about particular parts of the calculations. Third, looking at things like focused short webinars on those special circumstances. So for people who have gone through the guidance, feel very comfortable with the basic principles, but understand that their districts have certain exceptions or special circumstances, being able to walk through the most common occurrences of those, like pre-K, like our students who are outplaced, and like charter schools. And then finally, some example reporting development walkthroughs. We have the opportunity to potentially do case studies on how you might go from a raw data set to the actual data set that you would provide to the state, and kind of threading that through, okay, I'm looking at my books, what does this mean for what I'm putting in? And to say again, that would be more on the sausage making of the reporting. There will be a whole other strand of training devoted to, okay, you got your data together, great. What are you thinking about how to use these data, and how you're going to communicate them out to your communities?
So I think it's really important to know what you said about preparation and planning sort of leading to success. This is a big initiative and a big change. There will be a lot of work that needs to be done at some point in time to be prepared for that fiscal 19 reporting the first time out. But it's also important for us to consider the role that business officials have that are doing a lot of this work, superintendents in many cases as well. So Dean and Susan, if you can think of your role in your own district as opposed to being a part of the advisory committee for just a minute, What advice can you give business officials as how to begin their preparation for this initiative?
Well, we think there's some really important things that people should be considering doing immediately. In particular, ensure that the key staff members within the district are aware of all the requirements associated with this initiative.
One other thing you'll want to think about is you'll have to assess your financial reporting system, whether it's ready for this change. Specifically, as was shown in some of the earlier charts, you'll need to capture your expenditures by sources of fund, whether it's federal or state and local. In addition, you may want to consider, can you report things at the school site level? That can simplify the overall process, again, as you have to provide your summary charts.
I think it's important for us to perform some early review of what we're doing currently. As we take a look at the site-based reporting that is currently in place for our buildings across our district, I think that allows us to really dig into how we would think about what we need to add that may be missing already.
And then lastly, be on the lookout for training that will be forthcoming. Certainly participate in that so you can understand and have resources to support you in this transition. And hopefully the added benefit to this process is going to be, it'll help you inform your strategic planning as well as your budgeting process. And so hopefully it isn't just a work that produces data that goes on the school report card, but it will help inform what you're doing in your school districts.
Thank you. And I think we've learned an awful lot about school-based financial reporting today. Sarah, where can we go, where can our members go to get more information as it continues to develop?
So glad you asked, because if there's one resource that I hope everyone takes away from this video, it is www.isbe.net/ESSA. And there is a whole section devoted to site-based expenditure reporting. This video will be posted there. We also have the guidance up there, in addition to Q&A based on what's come through other webinars and other webinars and videos themselves. So that really is our hub right now for anything public that we're putting out there. It can all be found there. After you've gone through, especially the guidance, because we do try to answer a lot of questions through that guidance and through the Q&A, if there's any need for further clarifications or questions, I am the contact person at ISBE. Folks are welcome to reach out. My email address is sshaw, SSHAW, @isbe.net, and happy to field those questions as they come in.
Good, and thank you to all of our panelists for helping today. We've gone deep into this initiative, and hopefully districts are going to have enough information to get started on this whole process. Illinois ISBE looks forward to continuing to work with the State Board of Education as we see this initiative implemented across the state. And for those of you that have tuned into the video, I want to encourage you to begin this work today. There was a lot of good dialogue here about what could be done initially to start putting yourself in a position to understand how your allocations budget-wise are taking place in your district today and how that will be reported tomorrow. I think there are two things. One is, what do those numbers look like? And then secondly, what's the narrative behind those numbers? Why are they the way that they are? And if you begin some of that work today, I think you'll be really well prepared to report in 2019. Remember, it's this year's budget you're working on right now that will be the foundation for this school-based expenditure reporting in fiscal 19. So thank you for tuning in.